I'll ask the first question to all of you. How do you think the Holocaust history and how we perceive Holocaust documentation helped to prepare the ground for your work? How do you think the contemporary understanding of evidence, testimony, and historical and legal documents developed through the Holocaust, and what different possibilities does it give you today in your work? And maybe we'll get some more questions and then you'll have time to respond. Shelley?
Yeah.
But speak up so they hear you.
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me? Yes. So the matter of dreams is very intriguing. When we talk about history, we talk about microhistory and macrohistory, right? But in the near past now, we talk about these are actual people. It's privacy. So how can we take a very private, very personal, intimate matter and publicize it and make it into a public tool? So where is the limit between the private and the public? Even if the individual wants to get involved. So taking a very therapeutical tool and opening up what is for that. And also we know from rape trials here, there's a conversation about false memories and constructed memories. Without even going to fake news and whatever, deep fakes. So how you can contrast with that? What's your thought of that?
Okay, another question maybe? Viola?
Yeah, a lot of questions. All projects and archives are really, really interesting to me. I wanted to continue with the line of Olga about because we are talking here in the conference about the Holocaust, genocide, and how it plays out in today's political and legal discourses. And so very important precedent can be the Ringelblum archive in the Warsaw Ghetto, which dealt with oral history, with testimonies, with dreams, with diaries. How much are you aware of it? How much is this historical source for your kind of activities? And especially because about the interviews, the Jewish historical commissions after the war really developed guidelines for interviews and all this. Is any of it available to you, or do you feel that you are just reinventing everything, have to reinvent everything from scratch? And another question that I had is to think about the difference, because in the past, when they were thinking of documenting for the future, it's the individual testimony for trial or for history, no matter. But especially with the war crime archive, it seems to me that now it's changed. It's masses of information, and it's not necessarily about the individual story, but tagging it, cutting it, cross-referencing it. So maybe it's a different kind of world and project, and so it's not the individual testimony that or video that matters, but the mass of it as a kind of a new kind of evidence of the repetition is what is important and not the individual story. So just your reflections on it.
Okay, let's respond to this round of questions, and then we have also one question from Zoom, and then I'll open the discussion. Please, you can respond now. Whoever wants to be first.
Then I can reflect on this again. It was some questions, but I'll start from the last remark. Indeed, we borrow a lot from Holocaust history. Borrow, I mean, by how we look and what we look and what is important how to reflect this would be a bit a later phase, let's say. Yes, we know the Ravensbrück archive, and we also follow the Fortunato archive or collection, where famous historians would claim that the song, fictional document, story, recalling is an important evidence. So again, when we collect dreams, we always need to be aware that these are not indeed dreams. What we collect stories about dreams that people have, yes? Something they remember, something they add, something they interpret. And in typology of dreams, you have a lot of kind of differences which you need to take into account. For instance, if I record a dream with a sound recorder, it's another type of document when you have a written dream on the slip of paper, or you have somebody recalling you this story, and then you have kind of this intermediary in between. So all this we learned from sources that became important after the Second World War also. So it's not that we reinvent something. Here I would add additional story that this telegram archive that we have at the Center for History. Unfortunately, our colleague is not here, but it relates to this question of multiplicity of sources. We have like thousands and thousands and thousands of various forms of evidences. So it's not really like in the past that you have like several archives and then several diaries, or several in general. Like not that many. You can grasp them by several lines. But when you have like, even in the archive that Nastya described, you have more than 20,000 images. This poses a lot of questions to historians, how to work with this, how to work with data which come from social media. Horrible question, but for me it also, there is another problematic issue. For instance, I have a colleague in St. Petersburg and she remained in Russia when the war started, and she sends me dreams of Russians. And I have a lot of kind of these ethical problems. Like, of course I add these dreams to collection, but if I would try to make them public now or discuss, that would be a lot of troubles, I mean, not legal, but in general, ethical, yes. But there is the whole collection in St. Petersburg. They collected more than 900 dreams of people. What I found interesting, like preliminary situation, for instance, when I read about this collection of Russian dreams, I realized that the Russians of Ukrainian origin reacted very similarly to Ukrainians in Ukraine to events of liberating Bucha. All these massive rapes and mass murders had a lot of responses here in Ukraine and within Ukrainian community in Russia, at least according to this project. And I found it kind of interesting, but you still need to work with these sources. And that is why I would say that we are now on the phase of collecting of archives, but for instance, our colleagues in Luxembourg and in Poland, they are now applying for the grant, which will help them to develop a frame to analyze oral testimonies that we collected, more than 200 oral testimonies of people. And this frame would recall a lot of ethical issues also, you know, all these issues that you mentioned, like privacy, intimacy, how do you use these sources, how you interpret these sources, we still need to think. So now we do archives, but we still don't have any interpretation. It's totally preliminary.
Yeah, I guess I can add. I totally agree that the first aim, the first motive, I guess, was to collect and to save as much as we can. But we're still not sure how should we work with all these materials later. I guess, for example, for us, it's just we put some kind of responsibility, or maybe scientific interest to historians, for example, or to experts who will research all these materials. Because you asked about personal stories, yes. For example, we gathered this interview, we cut it in small pieces to take it properly, to make all this evidence be useful for human rights, for example, yes, for human rights experts, for example. But it's not personal at all. You're absolutely right. It's impossible to work with a lot of people, a lot of stories, and to make every story personal, I guess. But I was in Krakow in summer, and we talked with. It was about oral history and how should we work with evidence that we have right now. Yeah, how it can help in oral history. What should be methodology of working with this material? So I remember that one historian told us that he researched and he worked with Holocaust victims for 30 years or something, I guess, because not a lot of them were ready to speak because they survived through really horrible things in their life. So right now, I guess we have the same situation that there should be we should take a break to give a break to these people, not to collect anything at one time, because a lot of them, for example, victims of tortures, for example, yes, or sexual assaults, they won't tell us anything right now, and they will be right because they need more time. So right now, I guess it's just to build the process, not to harm people, but try to help them as well. So I guess there is no one answer on this question. I guess it's just a huge discussion that we have. And I know that a lot of historians also have this discussion because I heard them. But as historians told me that we're not psychologists. We just wait when we can talk to people, and then we collect their stories, and then we can tell their stories. So I guess it's like this, unfortunately. But there is another problem about distorted history. Yes, people start to forget things. So it's really interesting question, but it's really difficult because there is no answer, I guess. I think that the most important thing is just not to harm and to do that we can, just like this.
Thank you for these comments and questions. It's actually difficult to add something because my colleagues gave good answers, but it's really difficult to choose what to say. So we decided to say all we can because we don't know what would be important in the future. I think it's good that there are different organizations like the Center for History, Doc Days, so we can consult each other, help each other. So and our work looks like the same, but it is not the same. So we make the whole work. Thank you.
Hagi? Yes, we
can
can
I?
hear you. Yes, we can hear you, please.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say how fascinating your talks were, and I really appreciate the opportunity to listen to you and tell us about the kind of work you're doing in real time. And I was thinking, you were kind of repeating the idea of collecting information continuously in masses and saving everything, as you just said, Nastasia. And I'm wondering whether you already or tried to analyze maybe what might be missing, because I think you know, once we are going through this mediation of technology, we already creating a certain kind of an archive that inherently cannot say or cannot create or document everything. I mean, I don't think there is an archive that can document everything. So I was wondering whether you already have some kind of insights to say what does not enter into your archives, who are not, let's say, if we're thinking about digital divides, are not able to send materials, maybe it's a certain age, maybe it's a certain geographic location, and whether you were able to analyze these, this question. And another thing I wanted to ask is that kind of, I heard it, and from the three projects you talked about, I was thinking whether this kind of work is not only about evidence and documentation, but whether it is also, it has a therapeutic dimension in doing this kind of work with people that experience war in real time. The fact that you're already creating some kind of processes of justice by putting things on air and kind of also collecting things together and creating some kind of a public knowledge or public truth. Do you think it is also therapeutical for some people who join you?
So another, do you want to respond?
Olga Asaf wants to ask a question.
Do you want to respond to this or collect more questions? How do you prefer?
We can go just the other way around, that Nastya, Maria, the last one. So we can,
I mean, can we gather more questions or you want to respond to these first?
it's up to you.
Up to me. Okay, let's take two more questions maybe. Asaf, Patricia.
Yeah, I was wondering about the relationship between the projects and the state. To what extent is the Ukrainian state involved or at all? Because there are kind of, the state does collect information. The public prosecutor in Kiev, I know, collects information about war crimes. So are you in touch in any way with the state? It's all bottom up. The question is there any government involvement? Something else, the other question I had is, like, this is not the first time that Ukrainians encounter like mass atrocities, and there is I know that I know very little about it, but there is the Great Famine of the 30s, and I was wondering whether kind of there's been any attempt to document that in the same way that you are obviously it's not with the same technology, but kind of other bodies that kind of collect evidence, and is there any relationship between you and kind of these evidence collecting practices having to do with the Great Famine?
I wanted to ask you, well, you collect different evidence, different testimonies, but do you see any pattern who wants to talk and wants to testify? Whether these are people who are really living in dangerous places, or those who are in the places which are quite safe at the moment? And second thing, I know that Liora, you talked about this mass of evidence, and we know that also there are many centers which collect evidence, which collect testimonies. Do you encounter any competition among them? And are you afraid of the establishment of these centers, different institutions, which are in fact sponsored by Russia? Yes. So the problem of protection of private data, which could be at a certain moment in the hands of Russian authorities.
Okay, so let's go around and respond.
Sorry, maybe you can start with master.
Well, I will start, but my English isn't so good. We understand that there are a lot of materials that will be lost. They will not be in our archive, in other archives. For example, we made open call in social media, also in medias, and not all people noticed it. So maybe they would like to share their photographs or videos or stories, but they don't know about our initiative. And I guess we can hope that in the future we can contact them, but also it's such situations that not all materials could be in the archive. I don't know, maybe Mary will share their experience, how they deal with the situation.
Oh, we have the end of Minerva in my city, Minerva, ready?
Finally. I think that I'd like to start from the beginning about the
Please continue.
About limitations of collecting everything, you're absolutely right that it's impossible, unfortunately, because even with all the devices that we have right now, there are pretty distant small villages in Ukraine, for example, where live only old people or maybe disabled people. And I know that even police, like right now, even police cannot go to all these villages that were liberated or they just, bombing every day. So you're absolutely right that it's impossible, but I know that there are some group of social helpers or psychologists or even journalists who know about these places, so they try to cover all of them or at least help them to evacuate and maybe to talk with them later. But it's true that because territories in Ukraine are pretty huge and there are a lot of people, so it's kind of problem right now because it's not just impossible to talk to them and to collect their stories or evidence, it's even impossible to help them. So I think that the main point is that Ukrainian government should build the process how to evacuate these people, to bring the help to them, and then to talk with them. But I know that when they got to these villages, they tried to talk and to collect their stories. So kind of process of cooperation. About therapeutic specific effect and process, like the process of justice, you're also absolutely right, because when we talk to people and make with them the interview, they tell us their story, and it's kind of, they can tell everything they experience and everything they can feel, because for them it's very huge experience, and they really want to loud scream about it, like out of loud. So they can talk to our interviews, and maybe they can later they can get psychological help. But I know that psychologists recommend to talk to people, to listen to them, because they really need to talk. And it doesn't matter whether this evidence can be testimonies in the court. It's really important for them just to tell how they survive. So it's really, I guess, it's good. And also about the process of justice for a lot of people right now, we have colleagues from Kherson. They ran away from occupation. It was in May. So for them, it's also kind of a process to get the justice for himself, to work for this archive, to help to people from Kherson. So it became something personal for him. So I guess that a lot of people in Ukraine who work in such kind of project or who contribute, they have this feeling of course it's not this huge, but still it's something for them, they have some sense at least. So yeah, it's great questions, thank you for them. About Office of Prosecutor, you're right, they're collecting evidence, but there is a very big problem in Ukraine right now with all this evidence they collect. Their resources are very limited, and I know that a lot of human rights experts, they really really sad about the work of prosecutors, because they talk to very small amount of people, collect very small amount of evidence, and that's it. Because they don't have resources, maybe they don't really want to do it. I don't know what's the problem, but I know that it's the problem that they cannot collect all the evidence. Moreover, for example, if they liberated cities, people start to rebuild their houses, people start to build roads again, and to make everything normal back again. It means that they actually destroy the evidence of war crimes. So it's really important for human rights experts to come to these villages and cities first, to collect as much evidence as they can, make photos, videos, etc. Because prosecutor's office, they don't have such resources, unfortunately. So it's kind of a problem, and I already told you that we don't have a proper procedure about this. So yeah, this is how it works, I guess. I guess that I will shut up for now, and we'll give the word for Bogdan. Thank you.
Thank you for good questions. I will also confirm that the Ukrainian state is not really an active player, even though there is a set of initiatives with the website, all the necessary infrastructure and they collect stories. But what I have noticed, and my colleagues also are critical about it, that, for instance, these state institutions are not that attentive to people's feelings. So, for instance, it's similar to kind of journalist work. So they come to people who just been, liberated, and then start asking them, how did you feel? What? And they try kind of to dig in their personal knowledge, let's say. So often we academic historians or social scientists, we are more tentative with this. So we sign all these data agreements and consent forms, and we agree that we will not spread the personal information unless it's, adjusted, or the person who gave us information is informed about the possible way we will use their words in research. So we try kind of to protect as much as we can those people who were damaged, let's say, by this war, and not to re-traumatize them as often state institutions or journalists do. Maria wants to add. Maria, go ahead.
Later, thank you.
Okay. So here, I would come to your question about what is missing. I would add, there will be plenty of things missing. I don't think we will collect even part of all these disastrous things that are happening now in Ukraine. But in my case, what I find very interesting, how, for instance, my small academic circle worked with these testimonies. For instance, my colleagues who collected interviews, they gathered once per week or once for 2 weeks, and they worked with psychotherapists because they were also damaged by these stories. So people who collect stories, they are not robots, they are also people. And you feel a lot of problematic feelings, let's say, which you, if you're not trained, psychiatrist, or you're not priest or whatever, it's not that easy to handle these stories. So we would gather in groups, we would discuss these stories, we would discuss our own feelings. So these background stories are not documented, how we as academics felt and what we did. And for instance, in my project, I didn't consider it as a historical. I didn't really have this view that it will be a really important archive for the future. This is a small scale initiative, but from the very beginning, I thought that it would be a kind of secondary therapy for students, and this secondary therapy worked well. My collection was people writing diaries were active during 2 months, and I've seen how the circle of their state of mind, their feelings changed over 2 months, and at the end of the second month, most of them stopped writing diaries and they returned to, let's say, semi-normal life, like sessions, working, and so on. So in this regard, I call this project 2 months of war, even though some people were writing diaries up until the end of summer, yeah? And they stopped because I asked them we have a bit too much of the story. So it's of course it's therapeutic, but it's important to take both sides, like those who collect, who work with these data. And personally, I have always problems with kind of reading books on Holocaust. It's so difficult. And I always ask historians who work with this data, how do you deal? Like, I remember asking a famous Ukrainian historian from Canada, who's basically a Canadian historian, working on difficult issues, and he responded that he has a lot of problematic dreams. He lost a lot of, his kind of calm habits, let's say. There was Jürgen Baberowski, a German historian working with archives of communists, the high top-ranked communists who, sent all these, it's coming to famine issue, yes? He was reading Stalin documents where he would put on the margins like 100,000 killed, and then Khrushchev sending him some, letters asking, can I kill more, like another 50,000? And he said, yes, of course. And it's like Baberowski said that after these archives, he lost his normal abilities to dream in general or to have normal sleep. Because you lose something, you lose this belief in humanity. And what is interesting, for instance, again, is with famine. There was this question, Ukrainian famine of the 30s. This is a very political issue. A lot of people, politicize this issue. Famine trying to compare it to Holocaust, which is not correct, of course, but then there was a kind of this push by the Ukrainian state trying to convince, for instance, German state, so please recognize this as an act of genocide. It was before the war. And Germans were reluctant. They didn't want to do this because in academia there is this problematic issue where the Holocaust is a specifically identified crime. But then with famine in Soviet Union, it's not that clear. But now we have the German parliament voting for this. So we see how emotions also influence politics, how war influences politics. And a lot of things happened which I wouldn't predict some time ago. And there was a question also about other collections, whether we compete or not. I don't think we compete. In general, we try to be aware, like Maria works for a very great project which collects very important sources that we don't collect. And I would, of course, be happy if the state would have all this work done by the state institutions, but they are not going to do this. And since we know our state, and we know a lot of problematic issues of the Ukrainian state, we are doing the things that they don't see. Our archive, Urban Media Archive, I was among the founders of this initiative many years ago. And there was the specific political idea behind our archive. We collected everything which was missed by the state institution. So we collected home movies, private stories, we collected home collections, Super 8 or 8mm films, amateur practices. All this is not in the state archive. It's either on the market somewhere or is thrown away on the rubbish spot, and we were kind of these rubbish hunters collecting all this back, bringing from the junk state, let's say, into the cultural practice. So for us, it's natural. I mean, for the Center for Urban History, it's natural to collect something that state doesn't see, something that other big institutions are not interested in. So that's why we have a specific political agenda. We collect something which is marginal. And these marginal stories may not fit into the mainstream of history or politics, but these private stories, I think, would be important in the future, at least to know how these marginal aspects shape during the war.
Thank you. More questions? Do we have any? Then I'll ask maybe the last one, and all of you. Do you think about what will happen after the war if we take maybe not legal dimension, but the dimension of your material as experience, history of experiences, history of emotions. I'm talking about representation. Do you imagine how this material would be represented for a wider public, if at all, after the war? In what ways? What would you think each way bring to the table? Is it an offline museum, an online museum? What sort of things you might wonder about in this early stage?
The project that I collect, we want to make it public as soon as we can. So there was a possibility with the help of external bodies to translate these diaries and dreams into English. And this gave us possibility to give these sources to read and analyze to researchers from various countries. As I said, we are planning to publish, but mainly this would be a collection of writings by scholars, and then the collection itself is difficult to publish because not any publisher will do the hybrid publication. There's all the variety of sources like sound sources, visual sources, digitally born sources and so on. So we work now with the manifold app which was developed by New York University, and this is university initiative, and we will try to combine like digital publication with more kind of analog, let's say, the traditional book publication. We are not thinking about the museum, but what is interesting, there was an organization making an exhibition in Poland on the war, and they consulted with our collection. They selected my set of dreams, and I had, I shifted my family to the mountains, and I stayed at home alone with my cat and refugees who were living in my apartment. And with my cat, we had a lot of dreams, and they selected my dreams, and my cat was in my room. So I slept with my cat, and he was often in my dreams. And in this exhibition, they indicated Bogdan and Cat Korzik as participants. So I'm so happy that my cat became kind of non-human agent, became an author at the exhibition. And dreams about my cat and my cat became kind of storytellers, which is kind of something unexpected on my side. So I think we will find a lot of unexpected things, especially with digital.
I'll continue, I guess. We'll try to do it shortly. Actually, we plan to make a digital museum after the war, and I guess it will be open. Of course, it will be depend because we still won't share some personal information. I think that it's just not ethical to share people's name, address, etc. But we actually keep collecting permissions of those who want to tell their stories publicly, because some people ask to share their stories to media, to social media, because they really want to get justice somehow, and for them it can be a way to do it. So with these stories, we won't wanting to work now, because we have this permission, and if it's safe for this person, because we still don't want to share some sensitive information about them. I think that it's gonna be interesting and good idea to share these stories to raise the awareness, especially in some international media field. And also, I remember the question about production from Russia, and also production data from Russia, and also did you ask about Russian initiatives also? Am I right? Did I heard you correctly?
What I meant is, for example, that in Poland there were also different centers established. And I was surprised that, for example, there was also Center of Collection of War Crimes Evidence established by the foundation, which is publicly recognized as the foundation sponsored by Russia. So that's why we were concerned that, for example, people like victims, those who managed to escape to Poland, would talk with them, would testify, but we don't know what would happen with those testimonies, who would have access to them. So that's why I was thinking that we observed this problem in Poland. Did you have the same problems in Ukraine with this, vicious way to take testimonies from Ukrainians and to take their data?
I know that there are some initiatives who work with Ukrainians who were deported to Russia, and whether they're still there right now, for them it's really unsafe to share any information, but they managed to do it somehow. And also, they speak to people on occupied territory is also super unsafe. I know some initiatives who work specifically with wounded children. Even if they're in Russia right now, they try to help them, But I know that there are some initiatives like some liberal Russians who try to collect such information to help, etc. But I mean, I'm sure that there will be a lot of them because they need, to get some trust and to be a part of this new discourse, I guess. So this is our job. Like for me as a Ukrainian, this is a really huge job for Ukrainians, to make Ukrainian voices louder, because we don't know. Like if we're talking about Russia, we don't know. It can be some part of propaganda because they do it really successfully. So I guess that the first like attention and voice should be Ukrainians, and then maybe after the war, after like a long time later, we can talk. But yeah, I guess it can be okay. We don't have such problems. I never met such problems, but I guess that if you find such organization, you should pay attention to them, I guess.
We have another question from Hadid on Zoom.
I guess we need to finish, so I'll do it.
Yeah, just a short question, and we have to finish.
Sorry?
Yeah, please go on.
Okay. So I really have a very, very short and simple question, which was you kind of touched it in the last things you've just said, but I'm wondering what's your attitude and how you approach both in a philosophical, conceptual way and in a more technical, methodological way? How do you approach ownership? How do you address the questions of ownership on all the data you are collecting? Who owns it? You talked about publications, films, festivals, and I think it's a question that relates to these practices.
Basically, we don't have any doubts that the people who produce these stories, they are the owners of those stories. What we assign to them, especially with the oral history project, everything was properly documented, signed, consent forms, biograms, and agreements, basically. And this European GDPR system, this general data protection legislation, it doesn't work in Ukraine, but we follow it. So we use the frame, and what is important, we make it transparent. So people about their rights and where the data will be stored, why do we collect their personal data, and that they have signed this agreement that they can withdraw their words and their data at any time. So at least this is something that we can give them as a protection. Otherwise, of course, and we want to avoid journalistic manner of working with data when they need sensations, all this usage of materials. But when it comes to publication, it's a tricky system because, for instance, I have a selection of 10 people who will be authors, reflecting on the stories of those people, in my case, students. And we asked with my colleague, Magdalena, of course, from Finland, that we need to make authors also those who wrote diaries. We need to publish their diaries and indicate them as authors. But it depends also on the policy of the publisher, because publisher may say that it will be too much, the volume will be too big, and there is this always issue. If they might say that we need some money from you also to make it more reasonable for us to publish such volumes, we would probably need to find this money. But yeah, the issue of ownership is tentative. We try to follow the rules. We do our best to follow the rules and not to violate anybody's rights. So basically that would be my answer.
Yeah, for us it's pretty similar. We only own interviews with witnesses that we organize, but we got all the permissions from witnesses, of course. And if they want, they can ask us to delete the whole story. But we keep the copyright to all the authors, whether it can be, for example, videos from our Telegram bot, or we got some materials from partners, for example. We save their copyright, like for sure, it's very important. But the main, I guess the main problem is with materials from open sources, but it considers that if you take these materials from open source like Telegram channels, so you know it's already common thing. But I'm not sure how it can be how it can be considered in legal system. So I think it's kind of gray zone. But I think that we don't want to have the ownership of the archive. I guess the most important to work with this professionally, but not to own it. Thank you.
And about WWII archive, we make contracts with authors, with owners, and when someone wants to use these materials, we give contacts of authors or owners, and if they permit, we share materials.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to finish this session. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Anastasia. Thank you both you today and learn more about your projects. I'm sure everyone here will spread the word, and so that people around know more and other organizations keep in touch with you and create more partnerships. We wish you good luck and stay strong and stay safe. And Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Thank you.